You know, we'll keep the politics out of it. Never mind, because
Yeah, we
that's
can go. We
that's
can
a hell of a
go.
rabbit hole.
We can go deep down that
But
rabbit hole.
I feel like it's less than half the country that has the same. I think it's less than half the country.
Yeah, has that same
It's
mentality.
it's just like, come on, dude, like
Yeah.
whatever. Uh,
Well, with that being said, I just wanted to highlight a significant person
let's do it.
for Black History. Ruby Bridges.
Ruby Bridges.
Ruby Bridges. She 65 years ago was the first person to integrate into an all-white school down in New Orleans. Met with complete objection by the locals that were living there. Full-grown adults going after a kid. You know, the
Right.
fact that she had to be taken to the school every day with martial guard to protect her
Ridiculous.
from adults who were spitting at her and shouting obscenities at her and throwing things at her. A 6-year-old at that. Like, could you imagine?
Right.
Could you imagine somebody shouting obscenities at a 6-year-old? Because
there's gonna be no like post traumatic anything for them from that. You know,
right.
it's
like the things people have to go through, you know? Like, it's crazy. But the interesting thing about it is that she's 70 years old right now, which means she's younger than the current sitting president, which means that there were still people alive from a time where segregation was accepted,
right.
which is crazy that like it wasn't that long ago.
Which I feel is what still carries on some of that mentality.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the slow process of moving away from it is
Yeah.
because you have so many people who they went through it. They may still firmly buy in, right?
Right.
So when they have kids, what did they do?
Yeah,
You know,
pass it
people
down.
talk about indoctrination,
Yeah.
but like they pass that hate down. That's not that hate isn't in you.
Yeah,
It's taught.
It's taught. It's taught. It's a learned behavior.
And so that gets taught. And then some of those who are taught that grow older and grow out of it, right? They realize that that's bullshit
and they reject it.
and I applaud that growth.
Yeah.
And you know, that means that they're likely not to pass it to their own kids.
Right. They broke the cycle.
But there are some that embrace it, and thus you still have people who are younger of age, you know, in their 20s that have the same mentality because that's what they were taught.
That's what they were taught.
You know, it's ridiculous, and that's why I said it's slowly growing. I know it's less than half the country, way less, but you know, unfortunately, it's still a large enough population that it's influential on some.
Right. And especially because they're, you know, the controlling stake. So
And you think about the importance of what you were just talking about, of her having to endure that abuse and that torture, because that's what it was.
Right.
It was mental torture, but it was torture.
Right.
I mean, it was physical too, right? They were spitting, throwing things. So, but to deal with that, to take that step, that importance, and the significance behind it. Like you and I may not have attended the same school as we did, had that step never been taken.
No, that's so true. That's so true. And it's crazy too because for her to be thrown into that, because I can guarantee that wasn't her decision.
Right.
You know, that was
I'm sure she was once she was told that. I mean, that'd be a great interview, by the way. But once she was, and I'm sure she's probably spoke on it before. But once she was told, hey, this is what we're gonna do. I mean, what goes through your head? Because you know at that point that you're not wanted.
Right.
So what goes through your head?
To have to keep going back day after day after day.
Right.
Subjecting yourself willingly.
But somehow she had the strength to do it, and the
fortitude.
The fortitude just to stand up and say, you know, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna endure this. Maybe it was influenced, you know, parents and whatnot like that.
Definitely.
Partially.
Yeah.
But you know, you got to applaud that bravery.
Yeah. Progress, man. Progress is a motherfucker.
So, but yeah, no, definitely, that was a good highlight, man. I appreciate you bringing that to the show.
Unspoken hero, you know, like she definitely needs her flowers.
And that's a name, you know, everybody talks about Black History Month, and you hear the common names, right? And this is not taking away from the significance of their names, but you hear the Malcolm X's, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, you hear the main names all the time when you're taught through school, but you don't hear those names. You don't hear those other names.
Right.
They're not prominent enough.
Right.
And they should be.
They should be. Should be all throughout the history books. But to me, that makes it seem like a minority, or specifically a Black person, is going to have to write a history book. In order for it to be inclusive, it has to be written by either an inclusive bunch of people,
Right.
because it can't. I mean, for the most part, and this is a huge assumption, but for the most part, I feel like a lot of the books are written by a primarily white dominant
For sure.
bunch of individuals.
I mean, think about the books that we had when we were in school. Like, they weren't brand. It wasn't like they were made the year before. You know, they were. They. You know, we're
Yeah.
probably looking at 10-year-old books, right?
Right. Right.
But the thing about it, and this goes back to the curriculum. You're taught history, and the way the textbooks were made was by the time you got to a certain unit, you were in February. It was timed that way,
Right.
so that you'd get to the Black History unit, right? That
Yeah.
chapter of the book.
Yeah.
And the part that they used to get me a little bit flustered was you went through this timeline of history in this history textbook. And then you get to this chapter, and now you have to go back through the timeline, because rather than including all these events within the timeline itself, you have to have the separate chapter that goes, now let's
Highlight.
deviate from the timeline that we were going down,
Right.
so that we can go back and talk about these events that happened here, 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 here. And then when that chapter is over, you go back to the normal timeline.
Yeah.
I hated that.
Yeah.
Like, why wasn't all this stuff just integrated, period? It should have been so that because you're more able to learn when you're learning like that, right? Oh, World War I's happening, and this is happening, da 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 da.
Yeah.
And you implement. I don't want to go back now that we're all the way up to near modern times. Now I have to go back and learn about what was happening in between these times, and then
Yeah.
you know what I mean. It's like some crazy MCU. You know what I mean? Where you got to like go
Yeah.
back in the multiverse to learn what was happening over here. I hated that way of being taught.
Right. And then they even have it watered down what they're teaching, because they're not giving you not that they got to give you the real, but they're only giving you a fairy tale version
Right.
of what really happened,
Right.
Like when they talk about,
There's no harsh truths.
right. Like if they're talking about the Ruby Bridges, they're not talking about, the
torture.
the hate
Yeah.
that they had to endure
Yeah.
during that time. When they talk about the bridge crossing in Selma,
Right.
like a lot of people don't realize that those were kids. Like
Right.
those weren't full grown adults.
Right.
The March on Selma, like those were kids who were trying to go vote for the first time, and they didn't even make it over the bridge.
Right.
Dogs, water hoses, policemen, like children.
And
It's sad.
And see, even like you talk about Ruby Bridges. So I don't remember each time that part was taught throughout school, right? But I do remember when it was taught, it was always taught like, it was a heroic tale, right? It was meant
Yeah.
to be, which it is. It is. She is a hero.
Yeah.
But it was always told like, yeah, she was able to go. She was able to go to a white school, and although some people didn't agree with it, she was able to make her way through and get her education. It was never, like you said, it was the softball, and it was like over censored.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, call it over censored, I
Yeah.
guess. Lack
And
of a better term.
if anything, this institution is being applauded for
Right.
allowing her to come.
Because the way it was taught was like they made the exception almost, you know what I mean, to allow
Right.
her to come, and that
Like, nah, that was under
she walked through
mob.
a mob of people, right? That was taught. She walked through a mob of people, but what wasn't taught was the amount of torture, abuse, ridicule, hate.
Yeah.
None of that was really taught.
Not to mention it was under court order. It wasn't voluntary.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no. But again, but they made it seem
They
like
made it seem.
that,
Yeah.
that she somehow she got this exception to attend, and against whoever's will, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the case. So yeah, the way it's brushed over, I never appreciated that.
Yeah. And that contributes to why we're in the position we're in today, because people don't want to tell the whole story. Like you don't have to get into the darkness of it, but at least the reality of it,
Yeah.
like people were treated unfairly.
I don't want to contradict too much, but get into the darkness. I think you should. You have to get into the dark. It's important to know all the wrong in order to not have that wrong occur again.
Yeah.
You have to know the wrong in order to correct
In order to correct it, right? You got to acknowledge
to
it.
create right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like as ugly and dark and hate-filled as a lot of that is, you have to learn it, you have to know it, you have to understand it. If you're gonna brush over it like it was not a big deal, oh yeah, she was able to go. I mean, people didn't like it, but she was able to go. That's bullshit.
Right.
That's bullshit. Tell her that.
I feel that. Yeah.
Tell
I
her
feel
that. You know, and I'm sure many people have told her that probably her whole life, right?
Yeah.
But she knows that truth. She knows that what she endured. And, you know, I applaud it. I don't wish it on anybody. But
Not at all.
But again, you know, sometimes growth is pain. And but it sucks that pain had to occur and you know, just based on skin color.
Yeah.